All right, everybody, welcome to the September 2023 Fireside Chat. Really happy to have Scott Washburn joining us today. He's done a couple different symposiums with us over the years and is just, I think he does a really good job of giving people a perspective on what it's like to be a health plan, to make the decisions that you have to make. And if that's reference-based pricing in this case, what leads you down that path, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And he'll be going through all that today. So I just warm welcome to Scott. For those of you that have not participated in these before, we're trying to make them interactive. So there's a chat function on your screen. Feel free to make comments there. But if you have a question, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. Put your questions in there. I'll read those throughout the presentation and incorporate them as needed. And as always, you can watch this recording after it gets published by going to our website, clicking on the links for the Fireside Chats, and download that and give it a go. So with that, I'm going to introduce Scott Washburn. Scott, welcome to the Fireside Chat series.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Alina, you want to kick it forward? Oh, so here's a little background on Scott. I suppose I should have gone through that, but I'm just going to say he's been doing this for a long time. He's good at what he does. And he's got 6 degrees on their plan for reference-based pricing, but there's a little bit of reading material for you. But Scott, I don't know if you have anything you want to say about yourself as you go into this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, no need to dwell on the bullets or the intro or whatnot. Like you said, been doing this a while, and yeah, just appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, well, thank you guys again, Heath and everybody in 6 Degrees. Thanks for the opportunity to do this. When 6 Degrees reached out and asked, hey, we'd like TreeTop to kind of share the story about the transition to RBP and whatnot. Really look forward to sharing kind of what we do. And like he said, there's a chat feature and questions. I will just tell you, I'm very open. You're going to see in the data and what we're going to show you, there isn't anything that we won't share or talk about. So feel free to ask away. So some of you, obviously, some of you are from the West and might be a little bit more familiar with TreeTop and who TreeTop is. Some of you are from the Midwest and East, and you may not be as familiar. So TreeTop, and this is just kind of agenda, right? Just let me back up a little bit. This is the agenda, kind of what we're going to talk about, and kind of these kind of big pieces. So first, let's kind of move on to the next slide and just kind of do a little bit of an introduction to TreeTop and who we are, just so everybody kind of knows the organization. So TreeTop is a food manufacturer, most of the time known for juice and applesauce, based in the Northwest out of Selah, Washington. We're an apple and pear cooperative. So we actually have about 900 owners that are all growers in the Northwest, roughly about 1,000 employees. And since we're talking, right, getting into the whole health plan stuff today, about 1,700 lives. But anyway, we mostly do food ingredients and juice and applesauce. So like I said, if you're Midwest and East, the only place you'd probably see TreeTop is in like a Starbucks, a Panera, Chipotle, whatever, little juice box. But the biggest part of what we do are food ingredients. So things in oatmeal, cereals, Pop-Tarts, ice cream, alcohol beverages, anytime there's kind of a fruit flavor, as long as it's real fruit, it likely or has a good chance of coming from us. So anyway, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of what we do. We have several different manufacturing locations, 7 different manufacturing locations in the West, all between California, Oregon, and Washington. And then also have a subsidiary over in the Seattle area. So, like I said, right about 1,000 employees, all based mostly in the West, with a bunch then of other remote employees across 16 other states. And a little bit more info about the company. We got 2 union plants, 5 non-union plants, plus the subsidiary. And we've been doing this kind of self-funded thing on the health plan for over 20 years. I've been with TreeTop about 19 of those years, so I got a pretty good background of what's been going on within this part of the business and the plan. And, I would say really just for the group, and I'm sure others say this, but for many, many years, TreeTop has had a very, very heavy focus on preventive care, And just to give you an idea, we're in the kind of total spend about the $11 million range. So, we're not, we're talking a large investment. We're talking a large benefit and something that's really important to the organization. So, that's really just a little bit about TreeTop and gives you a little bit about the organization.
Hey Scott, on the preventative care, what all are you guys doing with that, and what kind of impact has it had?
We started several years ago, probably 7, 8 years ago, really with this idea that, most people, myself included, right? I'm not overly preventive on my own healthcare, but when somebody kind of creates something that kind of incents and pushes me towards it, then I might get after it. So, we started realizing that when we looked in our data, we saw only probably, 15-20% of our employees were like going for annual exams and all those kinds of things. And so we put in some engagement incentives where if somebody goes for the preventive exam, and if they also participate in on-site biometrics throughout the year that we bring on site and pay for, if they do those two things, that's what we call engaged. And then we give them a discount off their employee contributions. And, we give you an idea, most recent numbers, we see about 55 to 60% of our employees going for their annual exams now. So that's had a pretty significant impact, but there's still a lot left.
Yeah. Any issues with the union plans and doing RBP?
Yeah, interesting. So we have 2 of our 7 plants are union and have been union for decades. And when we made this transition in 2020, we addressed this topic in some union negotiations. And really, I would say it's the Teamsters Union, the one that we're specifically talking about. And they got behind it pretty quickly. They had never heard of RBP. They had no idea what it looked like. So we had to kind of sell them on what it was going to look like. And we, of course, did some things that we'll talk a little bit about to try and, encourage the employees to go that direction, like giving them a reduction on their employee contributions and all that kind of stuff to try and incent the support. And so, yeah, it's worked out pretty well with the unions. They've been pretty supportive.
That's good to hear. For, the kind of the makeup of your employee base, I assume a lot of them are hourly. Does that had an impact at all, or?
Yeah, so of our 1,000 employees or so, we have about 650 of them or so are kind of in the hourly production, quality, maintenance, machine operator side. And then the rest of them are all on the salary administrative side and spread across all those different states. So, we have a diverse workforce. We obviously have a large Hispanic population within our workforce. And so we always keep that in mind as we're talking about communication materials and different things like that. But I think also the key, the majority of those employees too, all being in Washington or in California, also brings along its own set of challenges, obviously, that we all know.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep. So I think, just as a little bit of background for everybody, I have to be kind of open to the fact, right? Some people know a little about reference-based pricing. Some do not know about reference-based pricing. And so I want to kind of share a little bit of how we got to where we are today. And, the reality was back in kind of that 2017 time period, we're sitting back there realizing that we're using a network at that time. And so the doctors are charging and we're just getting a % off billed charges. And that's kind of the normal kind of reimbursement model. And, we're watching healthcare costs skyrocket and have no control over them, all these different kinds of things. And so, I think really what happened in my own mind was, we were looking for what's next, like everybody else. And it's like, man, we can't keep down this path and just watching claims increase and costs increase every year. And so when we decided to really do some serious research in about 2018, we obviously were taking a look at other networks and whatnot. And the reality was that, those networks would have given us larger discounts. We could have made a simple change over to a different network and saved probably $750,000. And I think at the end of the day, even though we were taking a real serious look at that, at the core of the issue was it still wasn't addressing what some of the main concern was, right? So we were getting, we had no control over what was being billed. We had no control over how things were being negotiated and everything else, because they were just being paid as a percent off bill charges and all that kind of stuff. And so this whole concept was introduced to us about going to reference-based pricing and what would this look like, to kind of flip the model upside down, as I put it, and really reimburse providers a percent above their bill charges based on Medicare rates. And so anyway, so we really started diving in deep then in 2019, and we took quite a bit of time. I bet 8 months or so, to really dive deep into this. And as we started, peeling the banana back, so to speak, it really was just pretty obvious that this concept of flipping the model upside down and having a different reimbursement strategy for providers and whatnot was a way to really have a game changer, both in the industry and as well as for the company. So we had made the decision late 19 that we were going to make the change over to this reference-based pricing model, and then we were going to make it effective April 1st of 2020.
Okay. I mean, as far as like, if you had to pinpoint like key factors that moved you in that direction, or factors that maybe would have prevented you from going in that direction, I mean, what really resonates there?
I remember a conversation with a TPA that managed a different network model that we were using, and excuse me. And one of the conversations was around, what do you do when the hospital system goes and bills you $80,000 for a medical device, if you will, piece of hardware that only costs like $2,000, and they said, well, we pay it as a percent off what they charge. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not what I want. Like, that's not right. Why should we allow them to do that? No, I want it specifically negotiated, and I want you guys to bring the hammer down on them. And they said, well, we don't do that. And I'm like, well, that's not the right thing for us, and it's not the right thing for the business, right? So I remember kind of this one moment where I'll say kind of the light bulb went off, where it's like the only way to really completely change what we're doing is going to have to be to change the model. And that's was one of the big pieces we made to transition over to RBP.
All right.
So just kind of laying out a little bit of the timeline, which gets a little bit interesting as we kind of talk in this, but we had come out and told all of our employees that we were going to be making this change. We're on a calendar year basis, so we made the intentional decision to do an off renewal, if you will, so to speak. And so we obviously did our normal calendar year renewal, but we openly told all the employees that we're going to be making this change. And anyway, and so we started heavily focusing on the communication side of it. And with having 24-hour operations across multiple states and whatnot, we took quite a bit of time to kind of create what that transition timeline would look like and what that plan would look like. So set out and scheduled on-site mandatory visits at all locations in the months of February and March, knowing that we were going to make the transition in April. And then this little thing called COVID came along and threw a little wrench in our plans on our communication. So we actually got through about half of our employee meetings when all of a sudden we couldn't do large in-person meetings, right? And all those kinds of things. So we had to switch over to a remote model and kind of changing all that around. But we still kept the April 1st deadline, or transition timeline, if you will, moving over to RBP. So we made that effective April of 20. So maybe just to kind of share, right, for those that, like, let me just kind of jump right to a interesting kind of nugget and piece of meat here. Under our old model, pre-reference-based pricing, we had asked 6 Degrees to obviously run the analysis for us, and based on our prior year claims and all these different kinds of things. And we could see pre-reference-based pricing that we were paying about 271% of the Medicare rate. At the time, didn't really know what that meant, because, right, that isn't the model that we were under. So we were trying to get our heads around that. But what we knew was 271% of the Medicare rate was a lot. And it was what appeared to be kind of too much for us, so to speak, when we started taking a look in our to reference-based pricing, and then post-reference-based pricing, kind of look at that time period after we made the implementation. We were and are still now paying in that 139%, 141% of the Medicare rate. So, if you jump right to the end of the actual results of what happened from a pricing and kind of savings perspective, and I'll share a little bit more about this, but we jumped from 271% of the Medicare rate pre-RBP to 139% post-RBP. So it's a huge change and a huge savings to the company that I'm going to share a little bit more about, but it was a monster savings for the organization. And skip the savings side of it. The reality of what we did, we went and told all of our employees, said, here's the deal. We're making a change. You're going to get a new card. And the new card is going to be from our TPA. And by the way, we're not changing any benefits. You can go to any doctor that you want. And we're going to take your employee contributions down 5%. And that was what we told employees in those communication meetings, because we knew that there was going to be a savings rate. And we knew that we also had to get some support out there, because reference-based pricing is frankly not that common in the West, and especially in some of our little bit more remote areas. And so, so that was a little bit what we told people. And you can see right here in the data that there's a reason why we made this change, and we'll talk a little bit more about it.
Hey, Scott, there's a couple of questions came in, and one that kind of triggered me, what you just said there. But in that on-site employee meetings, what was the communication? What was taking place during those? In my opinion, the biggest mistake people make when they go reference-based pricing is a lack of communication or improper communication. Really not setting the employee up with the information that they need to be successful. What path did you guys take?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time thinking about what we wanted the messaging to be, and obviously had 6 Degrees on site, had our brokers and our TPA on site, everybody kind of help with the messaging when we were able to do the meetings. And
I think we were on site until they banned interactions of all human beings there for a bit. Yeah. We were there until the very last minute.
Yeah, until the world changed, right? And what we did was we started the meetings out intentionally with kind of the elevator speech, so to speak, of what we were doing. And that elevator speech to me was, here's what we're doing. So let's just tell you what we're doing. We're making a change in the health plan. You're going to get a new card. None of your benefits are changing. We're going to charge you less. You can go to any doctor you want. And that's how we started it. And it was right. It was an attention grabber, because everybody's like, wait a minute, I can go to whoever I want. My benefits aren't changing. You're going to charge me less. Okay, now you got my attention, right? And so we then would start getting into the details, and we did some education on RBP. Obviously, nobody had ever heard of it, but we couldn't spend too much time in the weeds there, because we just would confuse people, and we didn't want to do that. So we did do a little bit of education about what it was, how it worked. Everybody, right, is always feared about balance billing and things like that. So we did a little bit of education. We did some education on how to read your EOBs, all those kinds of things. But what quickly happened was, because of the pandemic, is the reality was there were some people that weren't going to see their doctor for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, whatever months, with the way doctors' offices were and everything else. And so we'll talk more about this communication, but we ended up having to continue with a heavy communication focus for, a good 18 to 24 months.
Yeah. So there's a question that came in, and I'm trying not to answer these because I know it's your show. But I know that because of the pandemic, we did have some questions around, what were the real savings? And the question is, how many months did it take to see plan savings? In that first year, the big question was, our members aren't seeking as much care because, electives were shut down and everything else. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can tell you, right? We get asked this question kind of a lot because, right, of the lack of ability for people to get into their providers and whatnot. We were immediately having claims analyzed pre-RBP and post-RBP like the same claim, right? Show me a hip replacement, show me a broken arm, show me a chemo treatment, show me all these different things. And we would see, as just like an example, we had a individual that was on the plan that every specific cancer treatment that they had was about $38,000 per treatment. And we saw it in the 18 to 20 range post. We saw somebody that had a shot for Crohn's disease, and it was $8,000 before and it was $1,200 after. And so we were having very close attention and paying very close attention to all the specifics. And then, because it was really hard to measure, right, whether things were working. And then obviously, and we'll show some examples here in a minute, but 6 Degrees was one of reports for us, and we were looking at claims, and it was almost immediately. By that I mean you probably got to get it, a couple months in for claims to run out and all that kind of stuff under the old model. And anyway, but almost immediately we started seeing costs come down.
Yeah. I'm not trying to give a plug here for 6 Degrees, but this is something that we do that I think is useful for plans like yourself, is kind of walk through, the discovery period of really understanding your own claim data. How did you figure out you're at 271% of Medicare?
Yeah, I didn't even know what it meant to be RBP even before we got into all this. And so I think, it's what took us so long to do the analysis. And, we asked obviously 6 Degrees to go to the nth degree to kind of prove to us why this made sense. And so we asked for a massive amount of data, and we just really focused on it, right? We focused on the analytics right around claims cost, on total cost, on specific claims, right? So we could, what was the difference in hip replacement? What was the difference in all these different things? And, and so it was really through that the story then kind of changed, right? So I shared the example of when I couldn't get a TPA to have a conversation about trying to specifically negotiate a claim, to all of a sudden saying, well, you don't really have to worry much about that because now we're just going to pay a percent above. And it really just, that's what we saw in the data, and that's what we were able to see with what we wanted to do within the plan and for the organization and for our people. So it really was a deep dive in the analytics that I think was, I'll call it kind of the final, dot the dotted the I, so to speak, for us to make the decision.
So there's a couple other questions that have come in here, and if it's totally out of order for you, let me know. But I think we could probably address them here. 2 of them are around balance billing. So I'll read them both off. But how has the balance billing noise been amongst the employees, and how's it been handled? So let's start there, and then there's a piggyback question to that came in a little bit earlier.
Sure. Well, all of us know when we go make big changes in our organization, it's normally something that happens to the CEO's wife, to the CFO, to the whatever, right? That these things happen. Well, I can tell you, I have the honor of receiving the very first balance bill when TreeTop made the change over to RBP. And, my benefit team was probably like, great. Oh, here we go, and I said, look, I want to go through the full experience just like anybody else. And anyway, and I did. And I reached out to the TPA, said, hey, here's what's going on. I got this. They said, okay, give us a few days and 6 Degrees will be in touch. And sure enough, 6 Degrees reached out to me, asked for some information. And within 7 days, the whole situation was resolved. I wasn't balance billed anything. In that case in particular, it was a provider that was unsure what RBP even was. And so 6 Degrees worked on the direct contracting and whatnot with that provider on the backside. And so anyway, I had like this amazing example where I got to experience it myself, and see it was actually very smooth. It was very quick. And, we'll get into some of these data points, but, to this point, I think off the top of my head, I don't think there's even a single claim out there that has been negotiated even greater than like 200% of the Medicare rate, right? So we give 6 degrees some leeway to negotiate some of these challenging claims, and they do, and they're still being resolved less than what they would have been under the old model. So I would say it's actually been pretty smooth, and I'll show some data in a minute to show you there's this whole topic about balanced billing really isn't much of an issue.
So the piggyback question to that is, did you have any trailing balance bills from 2020 that you're seeing come out in 2023?
Oh, I will just say this, and I won't give the big plug for 6 degrees, but there's a reason why you guys are doing the work for us on the backside with some of this work and direct contracting and some of the negotiating on some of those very rare claims that need some special attention. And obviously we're talking everything from helicopter life flights and all these different things that can be really complicated, right? All of those have been handled. And off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any balance bill that has not been able to be negotiated, because we want, obviously, the plan to take care of it, and we want it not to be on the back of the employee. And to my knowledge, we haven't had one that has gone that far.
Yeah. I mean, I'll speak from our book of business. During some of those pandemic years, you did see a decrease in balance bill rates. And I think it just had to do with the availability of employee and staff to handle that stuff. And then there was less care that was taking place as well. We have seen, coming out of the backside of that, a little bit of an uptick in some of those more historical, 2-year-old, year-and-a-half-old, 12-month-old balance bills. It doesn't mean that you can't get them handled. We handle them the same way. It's just that their backlog was getting caught up, and now you're seeing it balance out again. Overall, we've still continued to see a reduction in balance bills coming out of 2020 up till current state. So and I think that's probably what that question is about, is if we've seen any of that. We have, but we address it the same way.
Yeah, I did see the one question pop up in the chat about stop loss loves them, was the comment. Interesting, because of the time that we made the decision to go RBP, our stop loss provider didn't have any RBP clients. I can tell you our first renewal was 0%. And off the top of my head, I think our second renewal was 0%. And the reality was, right, TreeTop was taking more of the risk. It was going to take longer for a claim to kind of hit a $350,000 stop loss, which is what we use. And so anyway, we've had some good partners in the mix that have kind of come along the journey with us.
Excellent. Let's hit one more slide, and then I'll peel in some more questions. I think some of these other ones may apply better to these next slides.
Yeah, sure. So I just took a little snippet. What you see here, this is just a little snip out of a quarterly report, quarterly business review that we do with 6 degrees. Really trying to give us a little bit of perspective of what was going on during the quarter in which we were looking. So my team is getting together at least every month with 6 degrees and our broker and our TPA, and everybody's talking together. And this was just grabbing real data out of one of our reports. And what you can see here is, and this is July of 22, August 22, September 22. You can see, right, the plan was billed $4.2 million. Allowed, right, what we ended up paying was 1.8. You can see right there what the savings were compared to what the billed charges were. So I just wanted to, for people who either haven't seen data like this before, or they sit back and say, okay, really, you're throwing all these numbers out, show me the money. Well, here's the money. So this is just literally a snap out of a QBR that we were doing with the group. So, and we're doing this all the time. We're looking at by month, by quarter. And you can just see right here we were in this particular quarter about 1.4 or 140% of the Medicare rate. And it's been pretty consistent with what I've shown so far.
Good stuff. Okay. I don't think we have a slide that addresses a couple of these. So they're kind of around the plan design. Did you do full reference-based pricing, or was there a physician network built into it?
No,
Or
there's no physician network, and when we made the change too, this is a question I get asked. Do you offer this as an option for some of your employees? And from minute one, we said, look, if we're going to rip this Band-Aid off, we're going to rip this Band-Aid off. So we did it for the entire organization. There was not a choice. Everybody went into this reference-based pricing model. And right, it had no specialized additional network or some micro network or anything like that. We made the change that we do not have a network. We do not use a network today. Employees can go to any doctor that they choose. And those are all just part of the components. And it's a little bit more of maybe a personal philosophical style of mine. But when you have a change that you're going to make, do it. Right, take advantage of the opportunity and get it done. And I have had a conversation with an organization that I know moved to RBP, and they offered it as an option for employees. And it only took them a year doing that before they no longer offered it as an option, and they've just made the full transition.
yeah, I mean, that's just kind of kicking a bit of data here for the audience, but that has been a trend here over the last several years that you've seen more carriers allowing a dual option. And, that first year you'll see probably 50%, maybe slightly under your RVP. By year two, you're probably pushing 70, and then people drop it. But it is something that people have been using as an entryway to get buy-in. But I appreciate Scott's approach to just going all in. But.
Yeah, I don't know how how would you demonstrate buy-in to a person that is scared of making a change, right? And so yeah. So anyway, it's just a little bit of a different kind of style, and I can tell you, I do it again all day long.
Hey, part two to one of those other questions. Was there medical management or steerage component that you guys built into this?
Yeah, so we already do a lot of medical management, nurse case management, disease management, all sorts of things like that through our TPA. And so we also had to kind of bring them along in all of this. None of those services changed. We were doing them all prior, and we're doing them all post. It's right. All the sausage making behind the scenes, right? How claims are reimbursed, right, has changed, but all those services and whatnot that we offer has not changed at all.
There's a comment in the question section here that I think piggybacks on what we're talking about, but it sounds like they've used the RBP program, so they really enjoy having the ability to go to any provider. Did you get any feedback from your employees about that new freedom or complaints? Or I know some people are like, well, who do I use? Too many options, and others really enjoy it. So
yeah, I would say it was a definite sales point for us, right, to build momentum behind the support. But what I would say is there were pockets where, depending on where our plant was or where our employees were, where they may have had some access issues based on a network or whatever, and so they kind of appreciated a little bit more of the freedom. It really didn't come up a lot, but it was something that meant a lot to the employees to know they could go to anybody they wanted to.
Yeah. There's another question here. So it's got a statement built into it and then a question, but it's around Providence and some of the other Providence like facilities in the Washington marketplace that from what I see, it's kind of like rolling the dice. Sometimes they balance bills, sometimes they don't, sometimes they play hard, sometimes they don't, and you see that with reference based. But what's been your experience and any advice on how to handle some of these hardcore providers?
We have some of those. And, as an example, I have a plant up in Wenatchee, Washington, and they don't have a lot of providers, not a lot of providers. There's just not a lot of competition up there. And I got a group in particular that frankly they're uneducated about reference-based pricing. And so what we did originally with them was we negotiated a very specific kind of percent off billed charges that was even greater savings than what we were getting before under the network model, but it ensured access issues and all this kind of stuff. But it's 100 of our 1,000 employees, but we did it because we didn't want any interruptions, and it's worked out good. And now this group is opening up to RBP, and others are starting to talk to them about RBP and whatnot. To my knowledge, I'm not aware of any major issues with Providence off the top of my head where we've had any issues there. We had Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. Really, we had one particular case where they didn't like RBP in this one scenario, and so we turned 6 Degrees over to them, and we had a direct contract signed for 200% of the Medicare rate within 48 hours. And the reality was, prior to that, they were charging over 400% of the Medicare rate. So, we looked at it like the employee's getting exactly what they need. There's no change in the care. They're still going to where they need to get it. We're paying far less than what we would have under the old model, and the direct contract was done in 48 hours. So, it just kind of depends on where people are. The way we have our plan set up is, right, it goes through, the claims get paid based on the plan design and everything else. And then if there ends up being some negotiating, which you'll see in a minute, it is very few claims. I mean, we're talking less than 2% of our total claims. So yes, there's some extra love and attention that goes into those claims, but it's, like I said, it's under 2% of the claims.
Yeah, that's something, and I'll let you give your opinion on this. And I think you kind of just did, but I hear these things, and you're out talking to the users of reference-based, and sometimes they'll get stuck on thinking every single claim is going to get repriced to 140% of Medicare, and that's all they're ever getting. Right. And so the reality of these models, like a 6 Degrees model that allows for negotiation to settle a claim so that you have less expense from a legal standpoint, or a better member experience. There will be claims that get paid higher than that, and really looking at the overall results, not an individual claim. Is that something that you have seen, and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the story will be on a slide that's coming here soon, but if I back up out of the weeds of all of this, we had an opportunity to make a change to save the company $2 million, and the only claims that are at risk were less than 2%, we would do it all day long, every day. So, it's pretty hard to argue with the data and the results. And I realize people are worried about balance bills and all these different kinds of things. But yeah, we have some flexibility in the design, so that, right, if there's a particular provider that can't get their head wrapped around, let's say 140% of the Medicare rate or whatever it is, and 6 Degrees has to pay them 160% of the Medicare rate, who cares? Because before they were charging 280% or whatever. So there is some flexibility that's built into the design to make sure that we don't have a lot of disruption, and it has worked really well.
Yeah. All right, one other question before you go to your next slide. I know we've been looking at this one for 15 minutes now, but all right, are the claims automatically taken care of, or how often do the employees need to contact you directly to make sure the claims get paid?
Our request to our TPA is to pay them, and pay them as quick as you can, right? We have the money, we fund the claims. We don't need there to be a lag in how they're being paid. So, right. So if you think about it, bill charges come through, they get repriced, they turn around, go to the TPA and get paid out. And frankly, we want them to get paid out, and we want money to get in the provider's hands as quick as possible. So there's not like this big delay or nothing else. And so that also helps with the providers when the providers are seeing how quickly they're getting reimbursed. And for the most part, right, especially if it's like office visits, they're getting close to what they were already getting before. So it's been pretty smooth, actually.
And let me read into this question, and maybe there's nothing there, but I think it's still important to know that on the design of an RBP plan with 6 Degrees, you can set the parameters in which we will operate. So let's say it's a facility claim, and 140% of Medicare is our go-to reprice point. You can set these thresholds into which we'll negotiate to. So let's say it's 200% Medicare, and perhaps it's a dollar amount. So we handle that automatically without the plans need to engage on it, and then it gets paid at that.
Correct. And I believe our parameters off the top of my head are using that 200%. We say, look, 6 degrees, if somebody's cranky about it and you guys need to do some negotiating, we authorize you up to 200%. If it's over 200%, it requires our benefit manager or my approval. And I can tell you, I haven't had to approve one over 200%. So, I think what ends up happening is that because of those parameters, we can avoid disruption, so to speak, within the reimbursement process.
And this is a little plug, I guess, for those that are really stringent on the reprice point. We do have this is something that TreeTop's not using, but you can add a legal component to our product that, if you'd rather, take the legal approach, you can do that. And, that could keep it under those 200% thresholds or keep it from going over that. But that is an option for those that are in markets where it's needed.
Yeah.
Okay, we're out of questions on this side. Then we'll go to the next slide.
Okay. So this is a slide to throw just some big numbers and some small numbers out there to try and give you a look at some of the analytics that we're looking at here. This, I believe, was produced a little over a year ago for a presentation I was doing to a group of HR executives, and it was, right, let's just focus on some numbers. What does some of the results look like, right? So you already see here and have heard the 139% of the Medicare rate. When you're looking at that overall balance billed at the time, 1.2% of the claims were being balance billed, and 0% of them were actually being balance billed to the employee, where the employee was actually having to pay some, right? So these 1.2% of the claims were being negotiated by 6 degrees successfully. You can see total savings, and this is right percent off billed charges, about in the 67% range. And when it gets into this access issues and whatnot, like the access issue, this is something, and Heath may have to kind of lean in here to kind of describe a little bit what this is analyzing, but it's really showing you at the end of the day, virtually no access issues with our employees. We talked about those parameters, and even though our average medical reimbursement rate was 139%, those that when they had to lump in those and went through negotiations, okay, so the number bumped up to 147%. Well, think about it right from the company's perspective. The employees getting the exact care they need with the provider that they need, and all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes, the company's paying less for it and far less than what we were paying before. So, right, yep, there are some providers that need a little extra negotiating, and that's not a problem. So it's just this is just a one-page visual to give you a perspective of the analytics, what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, the trend is this continually decreasing balance bill rate. Now, those that are still balance billing can be difficult, or that might make it a little bit tougher. But that's what those parameters allow us to do, is negotiate up or get these things settled. The growing trend that people are using is an access issue, denying care to somebody that has a planned procedure. Now, our product has that negotiation built into it, so we'll do the outreach, help the member find a physician or a center that is doing those procedures and negotiate a single case arrangement. So anytime we have to engage on that, we call that an access issue, and that's that stat you're looking at there. It's still a fraction of any of the claims, but it is something that has to be addressed. And not everybody does those negotiations. It's a part of our product, and I think that's why you guys have had a really good experience with it.
Yeah. Yep. This is another slide that I used a year ago in this presentation with a group of HR executives, and it was just trying to give right, if you could summarize everything into one slide, what does it look like, right? So on the right, you see a little bit about the company and the organization and whatnot. And this quote that's in the middle of it is actually from me. It was a comment that I had made after I had a chance I was sitting in one of our board meetings, And interestingly enough, we were taking a $2 million savings in our budget because of the transition over to reference-based pricing. And one of the board members said, can somebody please explain to me why HR is driving the largest cost savings in the company? And it was kind of fun to sit there and let the CFO answer that question, because we weren't out putting this on a billboard that obviously it was an HR thing. This was about the business and what the right thing to do was. And we were able to as we were having savings in the plan, just to give you a little bit of a deeper peek under the covers, right? We took employee contributions down 5% when we made the transition, and the next 2 years we kept them flat at 0%. Now, as we've got into some medical inflation, all the craziness the last couple of years, yeah, we've had some increases, but I can tell you our average increase per year in our plan over the last 5 years, the average has been 4% a year. And I'll tell you, in this market these days, I take 4% any day of the week. So you can see kind of down below on the bottom of this, right before 6 Degrees Health, you can see what bill charges were and total paid. And then over on the right-hand side, you can see, obviously, there was an uptick in claims, and we were still paying less than what we were under the old model. So anyway, just gives you an idea of what we were doing pre-RBP and post-RBP in a little bit of a different volume, and obviously looking at some large numbers.
Question came in. Are you guys fully insured or level funded, self-funded?
Yeah, I mean, so we're self-funded. We use a $350,000 stop loss per claim per year. Typically, I have one, maybe two, if we're unfortunate, claims that hit that stop loss level. But pretty fortunate to have a pretty high stop loss and be able to take a lot of the risk ourselves.
Yeah. And I think you probably addressed this earlier, but we'll ask specifically here. Any concerns about employees paying a balance bill so that they don't end up in collections?
So the key with this topic is for an employee to even know what a balance bill even is, right? So we have trained and communicated to our employees what a balance bill is, how they identify it, and if it happens, what to do with it. So of course, I'm always worried about somebody who just doesn't pay attention and turns around, and if they get billed $1,000 that they shouldn't be responsible for, just writing a check or something like that. But that's why we focus so much on the communication side, right? We have told them, look, pick up the phone, call the TPA. The TPA knows behind the scenes, they're to turn right back around and call 6 Degrees and do all the work behind the scenes. So, but we want it resolved quickly. And I even shared, my own experience. It was resolved in 7 days. So I didn't owe a dime.
And part two to that question, has anyone had any issues scheduling an appointment with a doctor?
What we trained our employees to do, and I obviously got to experience this firsthand being on this plan, but right, you go to the doctor, right? You're talking to the person at the front desk, and you hand them the card, and they're like, maybe they've never heard of the TPA as an example, and they say, "What's that? We don't take this," or they bring it up in their system, and it doesn't show the name of the TPA as an example, because they're so used to only seeing on a card that I use one of the blues or Cigna or United, whatever. And right, what we trained the employees to say was, all you need to do is call the 1-800 number on the back, and they'll explain everything to you. And I got to do it myself. I remember going to a therapy appointment, and the person at the front desk at the therapy office is exactly what they told me. We don't take this. And I said, well, just call the 1-800 number on the back of the card, and if you have any issues, let me know. I'll be back Thursday for my next appointment. And I was back Thursday, and she's like, well, that was easy. That's pretty slick. No problem. So again, if you don't overcomplicate it and you teach people and train them what to do if they get asked, and the only ones we normally get asked by, I would say, are small, like one-person offices, right? You get Dr. Bob, and Dr. Bob's the only doctor at their location, and they're not part of any bigger kind of health group or whatnot. They are a little apprehensive because they're a little bit smaller. But again, call the 1-800 number on the back of the card. The TPA explains how they're going to get reimbursed, and it works pretty slick.
Yeah, we, 6 Degrees employees are on a 6 Degrees RBP plan. We're self-funded. We use the product. Everything that I sell, I use. And I've had Fortunately, I haven't, but my wife's had two balanced bills actually at a hospital that she works at. And I think it's important to know how these things work. I don't think there's a lot of other RVP companies out there that are using their own products. And so I think it says a lot. And for you to have that same feeling to say, hey, I want to use what our employees are using, you realize that it does work and it works really well. And the benefits are huge, but there is, that educational component is key to helping everybody have the same understanding that you have or that I have so that you can navigate the system.
Yep.
Question came in about PBMs, and it's a little off the RVP topic, but I think it's a fair question. Do you have PBM controls for specialty RX?
So we do have, right? I mean, PBMs are kind of outside the RVP model. I wish we had more. All of us wish we had more control over the pharmacy groups and whatnot. So that is obviously managed separately. It's managed outside of the reference-based pricing model. And we do have all sorts of different things that we're managing very specifically on the pharmacy side to do everything we can to keep control of those costs. The last number I looked, I want to say we saw pharmacy costs were up like 23% this last year. And I think everybody's experienced this. And, it is a whole nother side of risk management, of claims management, so on and so forth. But so we have some pretty stringent pharmacy side of the programs and plans that we do, and it's complicated and getting more complicated.
All right, let you get back to your slides here.
Sure. Yeah, and I think all this I shared a few minutes ago. This is just kind of outlined at a real high level what we're talking about here. Like I said, that 18% savings was $2 million for the company, and a really big deal. So again, when you look at this slide, when I talk to organizations that are looking to go RVP and they're worried about things like balance build and what are their employees going to think, and is the transition going to be hard, I come to like this slide and say, okay, let me break this down real quick. If you could have an 18% savings in something and have less than 2% of issues on it, would you do it? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, what are you waiting for? So that's how we kind of distill this down from a strategy perspective as to what it did for us. So again, there's nothing new here, but I think some of these were intentional decisions, right? No benefit changes, and took a little bit of a decrease to the employees and charged them less out of their paychecks, all that kind of stuff to help generate some support.
Next slide.
I do get asked quite often about, best practices and I, a couple of things that I would really focus on here. I would highly, highly encourage people looking at this to get away from a January 1. We still use a January 1, but the year we implemented this, we did it off cycle. We did April 1st, and I'm glad we got everybody's time and attention, right? It's easy to get the attention of everybody when you're not doing something October to December like everybody else on the planet. So that's a definite recommendation I'd have. When I say strong HR team is a must, what I mean here is you got to be able to tell the story.
You're talking about yourself, Scott. Is that what it is?
Yeah, no.
Just pat myself on the back.
No, I'm talking about my team here because, they're the ones dealing with this every day. And they got to be able, when we have 7-8 different locations and I got, management teams at each of them and HR managers at each of them, they got to bring all these people along in this conversation so they can help answer all these questions in case somebody does run into a situation. So anyway, so I think it's, it is something that's super important. There is no such thing as over communication. Like I said, we did mandatory meetings, we did English, we did Spanish, we did all sorts of things. We continued with mailing to the home. We even did mailing to the home to covered spouses on the plan with their own mailing about RVP and whatnot. And we also do that about our preventive benefits and all sorts of other things. But it was, right, how many times do we hear the spouse gets the mail at home or the employee gets mail at home and they just trash can it or set it in a pile or whatever? Well, we were trying to get to the bigger, broader audience of those on our plan. So, right, be creative with it. You got to use direct contracting when it's necessary. And that's obviously been helpful. Already talked about how we had to do a small contract with a group that we had a little bit of a challenge with, and it's not been a challenge at all. And I think they're kind of opening up to RBP these days. And, it really is important to make sure you have the right partners. And, we have the right partners within our broker consulting group, within our TPA, within 6 Degrees and the whole group. And, I got to tell you, it has made the world a difference.
I think the one thing I'd add, and I agree, you've got a great advisory group on this, and TPA, but having those three and the plan collaborating and working together is really key. You can have great partners, but if they're not unified, then I think that communication breakdown causes problems. I think we've got a great unified team amongst all the point solutions. So.
Yeah, because if you had a weak link in that chain, it'd be a challenge. And since we were fairly new to the RBP game in the West, in the Western US, especially in the Northwest, it was critical.
All right, we got 2 minutes. I know we got a few slides left, so we better hot tail it through here.
All right. No worries. So I've talked a lot about communication. I could talk about it for days, but it's the most important thing you could do in the transition to RBP is to make sure you're well thought out on your communication plan and strategy. Not a whole lot else to share there. So yeah,
right, there we go.
It's
Q&A.
It's been an amazing transition for us, and I'm glad just to be able to share the opportunity and what we did. I think it's helpful to hear from actual individuals who've done this and experienced, and I'll tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever. So
yeah. Well, I greatly appreciate it. I'm looking, there's a compliment in here about how impressed they are with your focus and results. Nice job, Scott. And there's a question about direct contracts, and there has been some direct contracting that's been done for TreeTop in a few locations, but the bulk of it is run through, outside of that would be RBP, and that's an RBP contract as well. So that's a part of the solution that 6 Degrees offers is that reference-based contracting. In some markets it's needed, some markets it's not. So that's something that we can do an analysis for and figure that out too. That's me. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, and then let's get to this. I think we're at the top of the hour. I think promotion for next month's event, October 19th. We got Jennifer Berman talking about mental health parity. So, she brings a great perspective on a lot of different things, and hope you guys can join us for that one as well. So, Scott, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you
continue
guys.
to be a phenomenal partner. So good luck in your golf game here in a couple of weeks, and show Bandon Dunes what you're made of. So
I'm going to try.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you much. See you next month.
All right. Thank you, guys.